Ever get that feeling like you're just missing a piece of the puzzle
Mm.
when it comes to, like, understanding people?
Hmm.
Like, why some folks just experience the world so differently?
Yeah.
Well, today we're going deep on a topic that's often, I think, shrouded in mystery and a lot of misunderstanding, really.
Yeah.
Autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
We're going to kind of peel back the layers on this one, uncover the core features, and hopefully gain, a little more insight into just the diversity of human experience.
What's really interesting about ASD is that it's not just a single condition, right?
Right.
With
Yeah.
like a fixed set of characteristics. It's a spectrum. It's a whole landscape of, individual ways that this presents. And that's why we often see so many misconceptions and stereotypes.
Totally. It's like we're trying to solve this giant jigsaw puzzle,
Hmm.
and each person's experience is a completely unique and essential piece.
Right.
So before we dive into specifics, a quick shout out to London Heartbeat's E-Academy in the UK. They've been so great in supporting this deep dive, and they have over 150 incredible courses, so definitely check them out.
Wow.
And don't forget to follow them on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube for all their latest updates. You won't want to miss future amazing discussions like this. Now, let's unpack this research a bit. So first things first, ASD falls under this broader category. Have you heard of pervasive developmental disorders, PDDs?
Yes.
What
Yeah.
exactly does that mean?
So think of PDDs as this umbrella term,
Okay.
right? That covers a bunch of developmental conditions, and ASD is one of those conditions.
Okay.
And it actually includes several different types, each with their own set of characteristics. But before we get into, the weeds of specific diagnoses, let's just focus on what brings them all together, the core features of ASD.
Okay, I'm with you. So instead of labels, let's talk about what we actually see, in individuals with ASD. What are those common threads that run through the entire spectrum?
So the three core areas that are affected in ASD are social interaction, communication, and behavior.
Okay.
So let's start with social interaction, right?
Okay.
You might see that a child with ASD has trouble responding to their name, making eye contact, or just engaging in those back and forth interactions that we're all so used to.
Right.
They may also really struggle with understanding social cues and forming relationships.
So it's not just about being shy or introverted. It's really a fundamental difference in how they perceive and respond to social information.
Exactly. And, communication,
Okay.
which is very closely linked to social interaction.
Huh.
Delays or just difficulties developing speech are really common in ASD.
Right.
Some individuals might be completely nonverbal, while others might have trouble using language in social contexts, even if they have the words.
Oh, so it's like having all the words but not quite knowing how to use them to connect with others.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. And it's not just spoken language, by the way.
Okay.
Individuals with ASD may also have trouble understanding nonverbal cues,
Right.
like facial expressions or body language.
That makes me think about how important it is to be patient and understanding when communicating with someone with ASD.
Right.
We can't just assume they're being, rude or dismissive. They might be genuinely struggling to understand what we're trying to convey.
You got it. Clear, direct communication is so important.
Yeah.
And sometimes visual aids or other forms of alternative communication can be so helpful.
Now, what about the behavioral aspect of ASD? What kinds of behaviors might we see there?
So one of the hallmarks of ASD is repetitive behavior.
Okay.
This could be things like, hand flapping, rocking back and forth, or
Yeah.
even just lining up toys in a very particular way.
Right.
These behaviors often serve a self-soothing function,
Right.
or a regulatory function.
So it's almost like they're trying to create a sense of order and predictability
Yeah.
in a world that can feel, overwhelming or chaotic.
Precisely. And then there's also the tendency towards restricted interests.
Okay.
So individuals with ASD may develop these very intense fascinations with certain topics or objects.
Like they can tell you everything about dinosaurs
Yeah.
or the entire history of the Roman Empire.
You got it. And, while these interests can be incredibly enriching, they can also become kind of all-consuming,
Yeah.
right? And make it hard to, engage in other activities or even connect with other people who don't share those same passions.
Right, right. Now, I know we're talking about kind of the core features of ASD in general, but you mentioned earlier that there are several, like, distinct types of ASD, right?
Right.
Can we delve into those a little?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we have autistic disorder, Asperger syndrome, Rett syndrome, childhood disintegrative disorder, and then PDD-NOS, which stands for pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified.
Wow. Okay. That's quite a list.
Yeah.
Let's start with autistic disorder, kind of the first one there. What are the key characteristics there?
So think of autistic disorder as the sort of classic presentation of ASD. It typically involves challenges in all three of those core areas that we talked about: social interaction, communication, and behavior.
So you might see like delays in language development, difficulty with social reciprocity, and those repetitive behaviors all kind of before the age of 3.
Exactly. And importantly, autistic disorder is diagnosed across a whole range of intellectual abilities.
Okay.
So while some individuals with autistic disorder may also have intellectual disability, others might have, average or even above average intelligence.
So it's not accurate to assume that everyone with autistic disorder will have intellectual
No,
challenges.
not at all. There's a lot of diversity within this diagnosis.
Hmm.
Now, let's talk about Asperger's syndrome.
Right.
This is often thought of as being on the, quote, higher functioning end of the spectrum,
Right.
although that term is becoming less favored as we learn more about the nuances of ASD.
Gotcha. So individuals with Asperger's syndrome might have excellent language skills and average or above average intelligence, but they still struggle with that social interaction piece.
Exactly. So you might see that someone with Asperger's syndrome has trouble understanding those social cues, maintaining appropriate eye contact, or engaging in those back and forth conversations.
Right.
They might also have very, very specific interests
Huh.
that they can, talk about for hours.
Right. So it's like their brains are wired for deep dives
Huh.
to particular topics,
Yeah.
but they struggle to navigate the social dance of like everyday interaction.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember that individuals with Asperger's syndrome may also experience challenges with, sensory processing,
Okay.
motor skills, and emotional regulation.
So it's not just about social awkwardness. There are many other layers to consider.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to Rett syndrome.
Okay.
This is a rare genetic disorder
Okay.
that primarily affects girls.
I remember reading that. It's really heartbreaking because babies with Rett syndrome develop, typically for the first few months,
Yeah.
and then they start to regress. It's like watching their skills slip away.
Yeah, it's a devastating condition. So after a period of, typical development, girls with Rett syndrome start to experience this loss of motor skills, language, and social interaction.
Wow.
They might develop repetitive hand movements, breathing problems, and seizures.
That sounds incredibly challenging for both the child and their families.
It really is. Now, childhood disintegrative disorder is even rarer than Rett syndrome.
Okay.
And children with this condition develop typically for the first few years of life,
Okay.
but then they experience this dramatic loss of skills,
Really?
including language, social interaction, and even bowel and bladder control.
Wow. It's almost like their development goes into reverse.
In a way, yeah, it's a very severe and debilitating condition.
Wow.
And finally, we have PDD-NOS, which stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder Not Otherwise Specified.
Okay, so this is kind of the catch-all diagnosis for kids who have some, but not all, of the characteristics of the other PDDs.
Exactly. They might have significant challenges with, social interaction, communication, but they don't quite fit neatly into any of those other categories.
Right.
PDNOS is a pretty broad diagnosis, and it's often used when a child is very young and more time is needed to really observe their development.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it sounds like diagnosing ASD can be quite complex.
Right.
Is there a, simple blood test
Right.
or brain scan that can provide, a definitive answer?
I wish it were that simple.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no. Diagnosing ASD involves this whole comprehensive evaluation
Okay.
by a qualified professional, like a developmental pediatrician, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. They'll observe the child's behavior, get, developmental history from the parents and caregivers, and they'll administer standardized assessments.
So it's a multifaceted process. That
Yeah.
really requires expertise and careful observation.
It really does. And the earlier the diagnosis, the better.
Yeah.
Because early intervention can make a world of difference in helping children with ASD develop their skills and reach their full potential.
That makes a lot of sense. Knowing how common autism is, how can you, our listener, be more aware of the signs in your own interactions with children? It's a question worth pondering as we head into the next part of our deep dive.
I think that's a great question. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of autism spectrum disorder. Before we move on, I want to emphasize that diagnosing ASD isn't about, labeling children
Right.
or putting them in a box. It's about understanding their unique needs
Yeah.
so we can give them the right support and create an environment where they can thrive.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not about trying to, fix them or make them conform to some standard of, quote, normalcy.
Right.
It's about, celebrating their neurodiversity
Yeah.
and helping them navigate the world in a way that feels, comfortable
Yeah.
and authentic to them.
Exactly. And that's where this whole concept of support strategies comes in. We've been talking about the challenges individuals with ASD might face in areas like social interaction, communication, and behavior.
Right.
But what can we actually do to help them overcome those obstacles?
That's the million-dollar question. What are some, practical, everyday strategies
Mm.
that parents, educators, and even just friends and family members can use to support individuals with ASD?
So one of the most powerful tools we have is visual support.
Okay.
Think about it. For a lot of people with ASD, the world can feel really chaotic and unpredictable.
Right.
Visual aids like schedules, checklists, and social stories can really help create structure and predictability.
So instead of just telling a child what's going to happen next, you might show them like a picture schedule,
Exactly.
the day's activities.
Exactly. That way they have this visual representation of what to expect, which can really reduce anxiety and increase cooperation. And you can get really creative with visual supports, right?
Oh, cool.
You can use photos, drawings, even objects,
Yeah.
to represent different activities or routines.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like providing a roadmap for navigating the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another strategy that can be really effective is using clear and concise language.
Okay.
Remember, individuals with ASD often take language very literally, so avoiding things like idioms, sarcasm, or figures of speech can prevent a lot of misunderstandings.
Right. So instead of saying it's raining cats and dogs, you'd say it's raining heavily.
Exactly. And when you're giving instructions, it can be helpful to break down those complex tasks into smaller, more manageable steps.
It's like creating a recipe for success
Yeah.
with clear, easy to follow instructions.
That's a great analogy. And don't forget about the power of positive reinforcement.
Right.
Praising and rewarding desired behaviors, no matter how small they are,
Yeah.
can go a long way in encouraging positive changes.
Yeah, it's easy to get kind of caught up in focusing on the challenges.
Yeah.
But celebrating those wins, even the little ones, can be really motivating for both, the individual with ASD and the people supporting them.
Absolutely. And speaking of motivation, have you ever noticed how individuals with ASD can often get really, really engrossed in their special interests?
Oh, absolutely. Like that friend we all have who can tell you everything there is to know about the history of postage stamps or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. And while those intense interests can sometimes be a challenge,
Yeah.
they can also be this fantastic springboard for learning and engagement.
So how can we kind of harness that passion and channel it into something productive?
One strategy is to incorporate those special interests into educational activities.
Okay.
For example, if a child is obsessed with trains, you could use trains to teach them about, math, history, geography, you name it.
It's like turning their passion into a secret weapon for learning.
Yeah, exactly.
And it makes it so much more fun and engaging.
Absolutely. And when it comes to supporting social skills development, one of the most effective approaches is to just create opportunities for natural interaction.
So instead of relying solely on structured social skills groups,
Yeah.
you might encourage participation in, activities that the child enjoys
Yeah.
and that naturally involve, interaction with others.
Exactly. Whether it's joining a sports team, a drama club, a robotics club, the key is to find activities that spark the child's interest and provide opportunities for them to practice those social skills in real-world settings.
Yeah, it's about creating a safe and supportive environment where they can, experiment with different social behaviors
Right. Yeah.
and learn from their experience.
Exactly. And remember, social skills development is a journey,
Right.
not a destination.
It's not like a one and done kind of thing.
It takes time, patience, and a lot of practice.
And sometimes it's helpful to provide explicit instruction on those social skills.
Absolutely. And this is where social stories can be so valuable.
Okay.
These are those short narratives that describe a specific social situation, and they provide guidance on how to behave appropriately.
Oh, okay. So you might create a social story about going to a birthday party,
Right.
explaining the different steps involved, like greeting the host, giving a gift, participating in games, saying goodbye, that sort of thing.
That's a great example. And you can even personalize those social stories with photos of the child and the actual people and places involved.
It makes it much more relatable and concrete.
Exactly. Another valuable tool is video modeling.
Hmm.
This involves showing the child a video of someone demonstrating the desired social behavior.
Oh, interesting. So it's like providing a visual blueprint
Exactly.
for how to navigate that specific social situation.
Exactly. And this can be especially helpful for children with ASD who are visual learners.
Now, we've talked a lot about kind of support strategies, but what about the bigger picture? Like, what can we do as a society to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment for individuals with ASD?
That's a crucial question. And it's something we're going to dive deeper into in the final part of our deep dive. But for now, I want to emphasize that awareness is key.
Okay. The more we understand about ASD, the better equipped we are to create a world that embraces neurodiversity and celebrates the unique contributions of all individuals.
I love that idea, embracing neurodiversity.
Right.
It's about recognizing that there's no one, quote, right way to experience the world.
Yeah.
Each individual, brings their own unique perspective
Right.
and set of strengths
Exactly.
to the table. And when we value and support those differences, we create, I think, a richer and more vibrant society for everyone.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's amazing how much we've covered, from those core features of ASD to like practical support strategies.
Yeah.
But now I'm really curious about this idea of creating like a more inclusive world for individuals with ASD.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do to shift our perspectives
Right.
and foster a society that really embraces, neurodiversity?
Well, it's about recognizing that the world wasn't really designed with neurodiversity in mind.
Right.
Think about everyday experiences,
Okay.
like going to the grocery store,
Yeah.
attending a concert,
Right.
or even just like navigating a crowded sidewalk.
Yeah.
These can be incredibly overwhelming
Oh, yeah.
and even distressing for someone with sensory sensitivity.
It's a great point. We often take for granted, like, how much sensory information we're processing on a daily basis.
Right.
But for someone with ASD, those same experiences can feel like an assault on the senses.
Exactly. So one way we can create a more inclusive environment is by designing spaces that are sensory friendly.
Okay.
Imagine a movie theater, right?
Yeah.
With dimmed lights and reduced sound levels.
Okay. Yeah.
Or a grocery store that has these designated quiet hours.
Oh, that's cool.
For shoppers who are, sensitive to noise and crowds.
That would make a huge difference.
Right.
And it's not just about public spaces.
Right.
What about like workplaces or educational settings?
Absolutely. So imagine a workplace that provides sensory breaks.
Flexible work schedules and clear communication protocols.
Right.
These accommodations can help individuals with ASD feel more comfortable and supported,
Yeah.
allowing them to really focus on their work and contribute their talents.
It's about creating a work environment where everyone feels valued and respected,
Exactly.
regardless of their, neurodiversity.
Exactly. And in educational settings, we can create more inclusive classrooms by incorporating like universal design principles.
Okay.
This means designing learning environments and materials that are accessible to all students,
Right.
regardless of their learning styles or abilities.
So instead of creating like separate accommodations for individual students,
Yeah.
we would kind of design the classroom from the ground up with accessibility in mind.
Exactly. So this might involve using a variety of teaching methods,
Okay.
providing materials in multiple formats, and creating flexible seating arrangements to accommodate those different sensory needs.
Right. That sounds like a win-win for everyone.
Right.
Students with ASD feel more included,
Mm-hmm.
and all students, benefit from a more, I guess, diverse and engaging learning environment.
Exactly. And it's not just about, physical spaces and accommodations.
Right.
It's also about fostering a culture of acceptance and understanding.
So how do we shift those attitudes and beliefs that often lead to, stigma and discrimination?
I think education is key.
Okay.
We need to start early, teaching children about neurodiversity
Okay. Well,
and celebrating the differences that make each of us unique.
it's about raising a generation that sees like neurodiversity not as a deficit,
Right.
but as a valuable part of the human tapestry.
Exactly. And it's also about, challenging our own biases and assumptions. We all have them,
Yeah.
whether we're aware of them or not. But by being mindful of our language and our actions,
Yeah.
we can create a much more welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone.
It's about recognizing that we all have something to contribute regardless of our, neurology.
Exactly. And it's about creating a world where individuals with ASD feel empowered to be themselves, to share their gifts, and to advocate for their own needs.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening, honestly.
Yeah,
It's made me realize that creating an inclusive world for individuals with ASD isn't just about like making a few accommodations here and there.
right.
It's about this fundamental shift
Yeah,
in our perspectives,
right.
a recognition that neurodiversity is not something to be like feared or fixed, but something to be celebrated and embraced.
Absolutely. It's about moving beyond tolerance to true acceptance, creating a world where every individual feels valued, respected, and empowered to reach their full potential.
Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope this deep dive has, inspired you to learn more about ASD
Yeah.
and to join us in creating a world that truly embraces neurodiversity.
Remember, knowledge is power, and understanding is the key to acceptance.
We'll see you next time on the deep dive.